Next is Peter Call. Peter teaches in London at London Metropolitan University, but for many, many years, until last year, he was at Cambridge University, and he has done incredible amount of research both on architecture but on the city, which has been a large part of his teaching.
Thank you, Mohsen. I think what Fashi said at the beginning was supported by a colleague of mine who said we shouldn't really be talking among ourselves any longer. We more or less agree. We should be talking with everybody who's outside this tent. And I think he's onto something. It's close to what Raoul was talking about this morning. I think one of the motifs in the 3 minutes allotted, one of the motifs that keeps coming up is interdisciplinary, multiple disciplinary, and the role of practice. And it struck me, two things about this chapter struck me. One was Mohsen's opening comment about it possibly being a contradiction in terms. And the last was Bruno Latour's comment, welcome to the 16th century, which is terribly appropriate given we're in Venice. But these problems at that time were framed around a rubric, I mean several, but one that you know is that between civitas, the citizenship, what's typically presented as culture, and urbs, what's typically presented as the buildings, the kind of things the Florentine panegyrists praised. That in turn sits within, and it's not a horizontal dialectic, it's a vertical one, a much more ancient dialectic between physis and logos. And I think one of the things that makes it hard for us to understand how to cope with something like ecology is that we tend to see that as natural and artificial, as if they are in some way an opposite, rather than, as several people have said, logos is a way of revealing what's latent in physis. Now, we could go a long way in that direction, but why it interests me is because I think practical wisdom, borrowing, kind of adapting it from Aristotle actually, operates vertically. It isn't interdisciplinary in the sense of epistemological interdisciplinary, where we get it all to line up according to a single methodology. And people were saying this morning that this is what architects do anyway, and I think that's right. I think it should be given probably more coherent, it should be given more credit, certainly in universities. But it's the kind of thing that's able to move from primordial experiences of space to highly abstract or sophisticated discourses from structural design, economics, so on and so forth, while in between being able to cope with office politics, one's own relationships, laws, and I think that is a movement from that which is more primordial to that which is more articulate. And I think why that's interesting is that it allows us to get rid of some of the concepts, like space, like form, that make the city actually hard to work with. When we don't need all the sort of surrogate terms for an urban topography, we can work with the city directly. And I think a lot of what's come out of both the book and certainly recent practice are new ways of working, but with clients, with what are called stakeholders, i.e. architecture has become more political. But why this interests me in terms of a bridge between those sorts of practices and something like academia is that I think this vertical understanding more closely or more easily enables the ethical issues to correspond to concepts that were formulated outside ethical frameworks and are therefore very hard to work with. Thank you.
So Michael Sorkin, he's really one of the most acute observers of architecture and the city that we have, and it's really wonderful that you're here. Michael is currently teaching at City College, where he directs the urban design program, has of course taught in Europe and in the States at lots of places, and is exhibiting here at the American Pavilion as well. Michael Sorkin.
Thanks. I'm extremely uncomfortable. My forebears come from the region of the Baltic, so I have a different set of genes than Rahul. and sitting here, I'm going to work the metaphor of this environment mercilessly. Sitting here and looking at the spectators who are sitting on the other side of the membrane, in comfort, presumably, under the shade of the trees, I am reminded of a news story that was kind of pervasive in the U.S. a few years ago. It was a story about somebody who was called the Bubble Boy. And the Bubble Boy is somebody whose immune system was so defective that the entire planetary ambience was toxic to him. And he was obliged to spend his days sequestered in a plastic bubble by way of staying alive. So his environment was privileged by a series of choices based on a reading of the larger environment that it was dangerous. And this reflects modernist architecture to a T. We are gasketed against a series of both real and imaginary toxins, some of them physical, some of them social, and so we are in this membrane. And the point that I want to make is that this environment reflects a series of choices. And there are a series of values that this place privileges to the exclusion of one other value. I made a quick list of what I think is privileged by this environment. Transparency, expressivity, privacy, exclusivity, presentness, identity, lightness, membraneity, and footballishness. What these are privileged in exclusion of is a single quality, which is, for Christ's sakes, comfort. And what a path we have arrived at, where deep architectural thought excludes that value that seems most important to human survival. Okay. Enough of the metaphor. Now,
Let the architect respond. He's
Huh?
standing right.
yeah. Well, and indeed, reflecting your thoughts, I started out sitting 3 rows back, where there actually is shade. It's about a 20-degree gradient from here to there. And, let us not speak of rainy days. Nevertheless, let me move on to the point I want to make, which is a point about the city, reflecting what Rahul has said. The cities are growing exponentially. We're adding 1 million people, not just in India, but globally, 1 million people to the urban population every single week. And it seems to me that the solution to the problem of the city can only be the city. And what I would make as my pitch, and what indeed we make in our pitch in the American Pavilion, is that the only solution to the problem of the city is the construction of cities. Megacities, sprawl, a lack of differentiation between the city and the countryside will not solve the problem. And I think they will not solve the problem on a number of levels. First of all, they will not solve the problem in terms of conducing a sense of responsibility for our private and collective environments, which is what, disreputable word though it may be, which is what sustainability is actually all about. We're habituated to talk in terms of the ecological footprint. A useful concept, but an idiot as well. Because it insists, as it does in most of its formulations, on finding some common currency, some translation into an accessible value. I require 2 square kilometers of the surface of the planet in order to sustain myself. My friend in Bangladesh only requires a square meter. Interesting fact. Nice graphic representations are available, but in fact what I require are 10 apples, 16 gallons of water, a flush toilet, 200 kilowatt hours of electricity, 58 bricks, and so on and so forth. So I think that the limitation of cities and the autonomy of cities is an instrument for conducing thought about kind of an actuarial instrument for thinking about the real level of resources that we are concluding. We can actually conduct the inventory if we can limit the data set from which we compile our figures. I also think that the construction of new cities in their autonomy is terribly vital to us politically. We know that the nation state is stressed, and whether you get your information from the Tea Party or from Das Kapital, something about this current capitalist enterprise in terms of its reproduction in the form of the nation state is withering. And what are we getting instead? we are getting transnational corporations. We are getting weaker and weaker democracies at the national level. And to me, the answer to this problem is indeed Venice. It is the city-state. It is the construction of new cities. It is their imaginary residing in boundedness that helps us to enjoy our rights. Another disreputable word, but a vital one. And finally, I would say that the production of new cities is utterly vital to our survival as a species, again, because of this ecological problem. If we are going to inventory our resources and our consumption, we need a principle from which to proceed. And for me, that principle is urban.
We're going back to this idea of sustainability as a notion which has a sort of gravitational substance. So it, in a way, alludes to the possibility of the human sphere to be lighter, to reduce the footprints on nature and so on. Well, you probably have seen, or most have seen the last the Shanghai Expo. You know the title of the Shanghai Expo, the English title is Better City, Better Life by, I think Rand knows this, the Chinese translation is completely different. It's something like, city is a better place where to live. So there is this kind of switch in the meaning of the words of the title, which explains better than in any other way what is really happening at the moment. What is really happening is that we are tremendously trying to explain from our Western position that is important, that is necessary to find an alternative to the continuous extension of our cities, which are year by year eating segment of countryside, segment of nature, and so on. But at the same time, we have no proposals, we have no solution, we have no alternatives to give to countries like China, where millions of people every year cannot avoid to be attracted by this tremendous trend of urbanization, because they have no alternative, simply because there are not enough agricultural fields to cultivate, and at the same time there are not alternatives from an economical point of view. So I think this is, for India, the situation is quite similar. I think it's quite different. So in a way, I think we should also try to be a little bit less politically correct and try to be more pragmatic and capable to face with this true and with me very serious question.